In a parallel universe in the year 1962, the Axis powers, led by Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, won World War II. In this alternate universe, US President-elect Franklin D. Roosevelt was assassinated during the war, and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki never took place. Instead, Germany dropped an atomic bomb on Washington, D.C., severely weakening the Allied forces. So, they have split control over the United States. The center of power in this world is the former United States, now split into two regions. The western part ruled by Japan, and the eastern and midwestern parts controlled by the Greater Nazi Reich. Despite their joint victory in the war, Japan and Nazi Germany have maintained a tense, Cold War-like relationship ever since. Between the two former American states lies a neutral zone, which stretches across the Rocky Mountains. In this area, neither Japanese nor Nazi rules apply, making it a place free from the control of both empires. In this world, there is a man named Joe Blake, a resident of Nazi-occupied New York. While watching a movie, a man sitting next to Joe slips him a card with an address. Curious, Joe follows the address and discovers a factory that serves as a hidden base for the resistance movement in Nazi-occupied New York. This group is determined to overthrow the Japanese and German regimes and restore the United States to its former glory. Joe meets the local resistance leader, who gives him a map and a handgun, tasking him with driving a truck to Canon City, located in the neutral zone. His mission is to deliver a coffee machine. Joe, determined to join the resistance group, agrees to the task without any second thoughts. Just before Joe departs, the factory is raided by Nazi forces. He manages to escape by driving away in the truck, but Don is captured and arrested. The raid was orchestrated by John Smith, the third highest-ranking Nazi officer. Formerly a US Army captain, Smith defected to the Nazis and is now deeply loyal to them. Upon learning about Joe and the truck, Smith orders his men to intercept the vehicle at any cost. Meanwhile, in Japanese-occupied San Francisco, a young woman named Juliana is practicing Aikido. Her friend Donnie, who has a crush on her, approaches and compliments her necklace. Juliana mentions that it was a gift from her boyfriend, Frank. Despite knowing she is in a relationship, Donnie insists on inviting her for tea. Juliana reluctantly agrees to meet him before her class the next day. Later, Juliana visits a medicine shop to buy remedies for her mother's arthritis. While she's there, her half-sister Trudy bursts in, excited and claiming that their lives are about to change for the better. Juliana, curious and concerned, asks Trudy what's happening. Trudy promises to explain later before quickly leaving. Juliana and Frank meet at a bar, where Juliana notices an unfinished painting by Frank. She compliments his artistic talent and suggests he should sell his work. However, Frank explains that the Japanese, who now control the area, aren't fond of modern art, so he has taken a job as a mechanic in a factory instead. Just then, Frank's co-worker, Ed, joins them and mentions seeing Hitler's trembling hands on TV. He suspects that Hitler has Parkinson's disease and isn't expected to live more than 6 months. This raises the concern that Himmler, a high-ranking Nazi politician, could take over and might use atomic bombs to wipe out the entire West Coast, which is now under Japanese control. After the date, as Juliana is on her way home, Trudy suddenly stops her. In a panic, Trudy hands her a film, saying it's their only path to freedom. After that, she runs off, but just a few minutes later, she is shot and killed by the police. Juliana witnesses Trudy's death and quickly runs back to her apartment. There, she plays the film titled The Grasshopper Lies Heavy. As she watches, Juliana becomes completely absorbed and astonished by what she sees. The film shows a world where the Nazis were defeated and how global politics unfolded afterwards. Shocked and inspired, Juliana feels a newfound desire to fight for freedom. It's later revealed that the film is created and distributed by a mysterious figure known as the Man in the High Castle. Even high-ranking officials don't know who he is or what his motives are, but he appears to be an ally of the resistance, with access to information beyond ordinary reach. Although the government has banned these films, they continue to be secretly circulated. When Frank returns home, he finds Juliana in tears. Worried about the danger of possessing the film, Frank tries to destroy it. He suggests turning it over to the police first thing in the morning to avoid getting into trouble. However, Juliana disagrees, reminding him that the police killed her sister and she doesn't trust them. The next morning, Juliana discovers a ticket to Canon City, along with an address and a time, realizing that her her sister was supposed to deliver the film there. Frank, unaware of her plan, wants to take Juliana to the police station. However, when Frank isn't around, Juliana makes a quick decision to run away with the film. She heads to the bus station, leaving behind the necklace Frank had given her. To stay safe in case she's caught, she cleverly hides the film underneath another one to disguise its true content. Whereas at the German embassy in the Japanese-controlled territory, on the surface, the Germans and Japanese appear friendly and cooperative. High-ranking Nazi commander Hugo meets with Japanese Trade Minister Tagomi, who has come to announce the arrival of the Japanese prince and princess. The German embassy is required to be decorated to suit the tastes of the Japanese, which displeases the Germans, but they agree to comply to avoid unnecessary conflict. Meanwhile, Don is shown being suspended from the ceiling and tortured. John and his right-hand man, Eric, come to visit him, but Don continues to stay silent despite their presence. John insisted on continuing the torture until Don talked, even if it meant beating him to death. However, it's revealed that John already knew the truck's destination and cargo. Meanwhile, Joe's truck gets a flat tire and he has to stop. A kind man offers to help him replace it. As they work, Joe notices ashes floating in the air. When he asks about them, the policeman explains that the ashes are coming from the hospital, as they are burning mentally and physically disabled people. Juliana arrives at the train station, where a stranger approaches her, introducing himself as Randall. He immediately asks how she got the bag, explaining that he had given it to Trudy. Juliana responds that she's Trudy's sister and informs him that Trudy is dead. Randall, also a member of the resistance. They argue over who should take the film to Canon City, but ultimately decide that Juliana will do it, as the person receiving the film expects to meet a woman. Juliana boards a bus bound for Canon City, but on her way, her bag gets stolen. Juliana continues her journey without any money, but fortunately, the videotape is still in her possession. Meanwhile, Tagomi is at the airport, welcoming Colonel Rudolph from Germany. Tagomi is aware that neither he nor Rudolph truly desires peace, and both view the division of America as a serious mistake. With Hitler's health deteriorating, they feared that if he died, it could trigger another nuclear attack, with San Francisco likely being the first target. Whereas Frank and Randall are arrested. The authorities have discovered they were hiding the film from the police. Juliana arrives at a hotel in Canon City and waits for the person she's supposed to meet. At a diner, she orders food, but realizes she doesn't have any money to pay. Just then, Joe steps in and covers the bill. It's revealed that Joe is secretly a spy working for the Nazis. He makes a call to John, revealing that he is the one responsible for Don's arrest. Back in San Francisco, Frank and Randall are imprisoned and tortured. Despite the pain, Frank remains silent. Officer Kido threatens Frank by revealing that his entire family is Jewish, a fact that could lead to their execution. Later, Frank and Randall are left alone, and Randall urges Frank not to reveal Juliana's whereabouts, insisting that what she's doing is more important than Frank's family. Meanwhile, Frank's sister Laura and her 2 children are brought to the police station and left in a room. Officer Kido coldly informs Frank that they will all be poisoned in half an hour, giving him time to reconsider. To solve her money problems, Juliana starts working as a waitress at the diner. While working, she notices a man named Alan reading a Bible. Curious, she asks about it, and he directs her to a store where she can get the book. Juliana visits the store, unaware that Joe is secretly watching her. At the same time in New York, John Smith is on his way to a government building with his assistant Eric when they are attacked by a group of rebels. John manages to kill all of them and captures a man who is taken in for interrogation. Back in prison, Frank discovers that his cellmate is Randall, the same man who gave the videotape to Trudy. The two discuss the tape and its significance. Elsewhere, Juliana meets Alan again and tells him she has something important to discuss. They arrange to meet on a bridge that night. Joe, seeing Juliana talking to Alan, becomes suspicious and calls John, describing Alan's appearance and reporting him as a potential threat. Later, Juliana asks Joe to mail an envelope to her mother if she doesn't return. After she leaves the room, Joe opens the envelope and discovers Juliana's true identity and details about the videotape. Curiosity gets the better of him, and he watches the film he possesses. The alternate reality shown in the film fills Joe with a desire to fight back against the oppressive regimes. Joe soon learns that Alan isn't a rebel, but a fellow Nazi spy, just like him. Realizing that Juliana is in grave danger, Joe grabs his gun and heads to the bridge to protect her. Meanwhile, at the Japanese police station, Kido follows through on his threat, killing Frank's family. Shortly after, 2 Japanese guards take Randall away and execute him. Kido then returns to further interrogate Frank, who, devastated, pleads to be killed. Moments before Frank's execution, Kido discovers the woman who stole from Juliana on the bus. Upon finding the fake film, they mistakenly conclude that Juliana and Frank are innocent. Joe rushes to the dam where Juliana is meeting Alan. Alan tries to kill her, but Joe arrives just in time. Juliana throws Alan off the dam. Afterwards, she breaks down, crying in Joe's arms. They return to the hotel, but in this hurry, Juliana's drawing fell, which Frank had given her. At the hotel, Joe helps her calm down. The next morning, Joe insists they leave immediately, but Juliana suggests they leave gradually to avoid suspicion. They agree to check out of the hotel at different times to avoid drawing attention. Back in San Francisco, Frank returns to his apartment and collapses into bed, emotionally and physically drained by the events of the past 24 hours. The following day, his co-worker Ed brings him a letter stating that as enemies of the state, his sister and her children are not entitled to a burial and will be cremated within a few days. Frank goes to the police station and identifies their bodies. Frank's sorrow has turned to rage. He vows to avenge his family's death at the hands of the Japanese. Later, Juliana calls Frank, but he refuses to speak to her, still bitter and hurt, believing her actions indirectly led to his family's deaths. Meanwhile, John receives a call from Joe, asking if he has identified any rebels in the diner, subtly referring to Juliana. Joe lies, saying he hasn't suspected anyone yet, but wants to stay for another week to be sure. However, John disagrees, stating that the rebels should have already appeared, and their absence indicates they've caught on to the Nazis' plan. He orders Joe to return immediately. Joe reluctantly agrees, and heads to a gas station to prepare for his journey back. While refueling, a man in a hat approaches Joe, demanding to see his papers. The man is Marshall, a ruthless Nazi officer known for killing hundreds of rebels in the neutral zone and a staunch Nazi propaganda supporter. Suspicious of Joe, Marshall asks for his identification card, sparking tension between the two. After confirming Joe's identity, Marshall shows a photo of Alan to a bystander, revealing that he's investigating Alan's disappearance. Realizing Marshall is on his trail, Joe rushes back to the diner to warn Juliana, urging her to leave quickly and dispose of Alan's body at the dam before Marshall finds it. They head to the dam, retrieve Alan's body, and get rid of it to cover their tracks. Meanwhile, Marshall follows a lead to a local bookstore and questions the owner about Juliana. The bookstore owner reluctantly gives Juliana's information. Before leaving, Marshall pulls out a deck of cards featuring photos of wanted individuals. To the owner's horror, his face is on one of the cards. Marshall coldly kills the bookstore owner and hangs his body in the town square as a brutal message. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, high-ranking German and Japanese officials welcome the Japanese crown prince and princess. After the formalities, the prince privately expresses his concerns to the princess about the rapid advancements in Nazi technology. He fears that if left unchecked, the Nazis' technological superiority could lead to another world war, especially after Hitler's inevitable death. During the banquet, Tagomi is in a crucial meeting with a Nazi scientist named Wegener, discussing a potentially world-changing deal. Wegener possesses the recipe for an atomic bomb, a technology the Nazis have, but Japan does not. He agrees to share the recipe with Japan's science minister, preparing the country in case of an attack. Tagomi requests that Wegener hand over the recipe on the day of the Crown Prince's speech, as the event will draw everyone's attention and provide the perfect cover. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince and Princess met with the Nazi ambassador to finalize the details of the prince's upcoming speech to the residents of San Francisco. The ambassador suggests canceling the speech due to security concerns, but the prince trusts Kido's team to ensure his safety. Elsewhere, Marshall is stopped by a young boy on the street who offers to reveal the location of the man with glasses. Marshall pins the boy down and threatens him until he reveals the information. The boy discloses that Alan had driven towards the dam late at night. Marshall follows this lead to the dam and discovers Juliana's missing drawing, a crucial clue in his search. Joe and Juliana, while disposing of Alan's car, find a map inside it. A particular location is marked on the map, so they decide to investigate. When they arrive, they discover a chained corpse, revealing that rebels are being tortured at this site. Alongside the body, they find a note listing the names of resistance members, including her sister Trudy and Lemuel, the diner owner. Meanwhile, Frank's brother-in-law visits, blaming Frank's girlfriend for the deaths of his wife and children. He harbors intense resentment toward Frank, for choosing his girlfriend over family. After the confrontation, Frank hears the Crown Prince's itinerary on the TV, and his anger toward the Japanese reaches its boiling point. Fueled by rage, Frank goes to the factory and prepares a gun, ready to exact his revenge. Marshall is in the diner with Lemuel, inquiring about Juliana's whereabouts. Lemuel, who used to employ Juliana, lies and says she disappeared a few days ago, hoping to cover for her and protect her from Marshall's scrutiny. Juliana and Joe return to Canon City, determined to find Lemuel. On their way, they encounter the body of the bookstore owner, hanging as a grim warning. Suddenly, Marshall blocks their path with his car and opens fire. In the ensuing chaos, Juliana leaps from the car and flees, with Marshall in hot pursuit. Just as he is about to catch her, Joe arrives and knocks Marshall out from behind. However, when they reach the outside, they discover their truck is missing. With no other options, they take refuge in another house to hide from Marshall. Marshall, still on their trail, spots the boy from earlier and asks for their whereabouts. The boy misleads Marshall by pointing in the wrong direction, allowing Joe and Juliana to breathe a sigh of relief. They then ask the boy for directions to Lemuel's house, and following his instructions, manage to locate it. Lemuel, being very cautious, only allows Juliana inside, while Joe stays outside to keep watch. Juliana explains to Lemuel about the videotape and the events at the mine. Lemuel reveals that he had not trusted her initially, which is why he didn't disclose his identity before. He then insists on getting the videotape, but Juliana is determined to deliver it to Lemuel's superior herself. After the meeting, Juliana tells Joe that they will be meeting the film producer known as the Man in the High Castle. Joe contacts his superior, John, to inform him of the potential meeting. John instructs Joe not to bring the videotape to the Man in the High Castle and to kill him at any cost. Meanwhile, Frank is at home, practicing his shooting skills and studying the layout of the venue where the Crown Prince's speech will take place. Ed cautiously asks if Frank is planning to assassinate the prince, but Frank doesn't respond. Ed advises Frank to carefully consider every step he takes, warning him that any reckless actions will not be forgiven by the police. Whereas the Crown Princess talks to Trade Minister Tagomi, she expresses concern that the Crown Prince is deeply troubled, fearing Japan is losing its grip. The next day, Colonel Rudolph from Germany prepares a capsule containing a microfilm and places it in an envelope. Tagomi arrives and informs Rudolph that he has arranged for him to sit next to the Japanese minister during the Crown Prince's speech. Rudolph's task is to slip the envelope into the minister's pocket during the speech. Morning arrives and Lemuel leads Joe and Juliana on a hike through the woods. Midway, they are surrounded by a group of revolutionaries who recognize Joe as a spy. Joe defends himself by showing them the film, arguing that he wouldn't have brought it if he were truly a spy. Juliana also vouches for him, highlighting how he has consistently helped her against the Nazis. Lemuel apologizes for the confusion and advises them to head to a location on the other side of the hill. Meanwhile, Frank visits an antique shop, seeking bullets for his vintage gun. The shopkeeper hesitates to sell them, sensing the gravity of Frank's intentions. However, when Frank offers a substantial sum of money, the shopkeeper reluctantly agrees. With the bullets in hand, Frank moves one step closer to his plan of assassinating the Crown Prince. In New York, John is still trying to identify the person responsible for the attack. Determined to get answers, John decides to visit the assassin himself. However, by the time he arrives, he finds that the man has committed suicide using a spoon. Meanwhile, Ed discovers the loaded gun and tries to prevent Frank from going through with his plan. During their struggle, Frank is shot in the shoulder but manages to subdue Ed, locking him in a room. Juliana attempts to steal a car for their escape, but is caught by Marshall. In a frantic getaway, she crashes the car, which bursts into flames, killing her. Marshall inspects the charred remains, believing Juliana is dead. Unbeknownst to him, it's part of a ruse by Joe and Juliana. The body is actually the chained corpse they found earlier. At the speech venue, Colonel Rudolph manages to enter the hall, but the Japanese minister's seat is unexpectedly moved. Rudolph is forced to sit behind the minister, altering his plan. Juliana, believing Frank is in trouble, calls him, but Ed answers. Ed reveals Frank's recent actions, which prompts Juliana to immediately catch a bus to San Francisco. As the prince's speech begins in San Francisco, Wegener prepares to discreetly pass the microfilm to the Japanese science minister from the crowd. Nearby, Frank positions himself for his assassination attempt. However, just as Frank is about to draw his gun, another shooter emerges and fires at the prince first, disrupting Frank's plan and adding to the chaos. Frank is stunned and notices his gun exposed in his hand. A nearby Japanese boy and his father see it. Frank quickly hides the gun in his coat pocket, but the necklace he made for Juliana falls to the ground. Tagumi and the Crown Princess rush to aid the wounded Crown Prince, while Kido orders a lockdown to find the shooter. Wegener watches from the podium as the princess leaves with the prince, who is taken to the hospital. Frank manages to escape the scene. Wegener swallows the microfilm he intended to give to the science minister to keep it hidden. Frank hides his gun near a sewer and returns home to find an upset Ed, who has spoken with Juliana. Tagumi finds Juliana's necklace at the scene and later sees the distressed princess at the hospital. Juliana returns to San Francisco, where she tries to reconnect with Frank, but he's distant and angry. Juliana heads to her mother's house, unaware of her trip to Canon City or Trudy's death. Her mother laments the family's losses, leading Juliana to rush back to Frank, apologizing and regretting her actions. Frank says things can't go back to how they were. Meanwhile, Joe arrives in New York City, only to be kidnapped by Nazi agents. At a hotel, Tagumi meets Wegener, who reveals he swallowed the microfilm to keep it safe. Tagumi tries to persuade Wegener to leave, but Wegener insists on delivering the information to prevent a world war. Tagumi offers to help him get to New York City. In a troubling scene, Kido and Yoshida discover a Japanese officer committing seppuku, likely for failing to prevent the assassination attempt. Kido warns Yoshida that he might have to do the same if the assassin isn't found soon. Juliana, now a fugitive, decides to turn herself in and is interrogated by Yoshida and Kido. They ask her about Randall, and Yoshida strikes her when she denies knowing him. Juliana finds Randall's house ransacked and encounters Karen, who asks about the film. Juliana realizes there's a leak within the Japanese authority building and decides to apply for a job there to investigate. Joe is debriefed by Major Clem and John, who are displeased with his report and performance. John, however, invites Joe to his family picnic, hoping to build a connection. Frank and Ed attend Laura's memorial service and meet with Bill and Mark Sampson. Tagumi tries to persuade Kido to release Wegener's passport but fails. Wegener delivers the microfilm to the science minister and swallows it before being screened by the Japanese. Juliana starts her new job at the Japanese authority building. She meets Tagumi and recognizes the significance of the Sakura Code, leading her to a listening room where she finds the grasshopper file. She discovers Arnold, her stepfather, among the eavesdroppers and manages to leave with the file before being caught. Joe, staying at John's house, attempts to steal the grasshopper file but finds all the pages blank when he retrieves it. John reveals he has been watching Joe and that he is aware of Joe's actions. Holding up a sketch of Juliana, John demands to know who she is. Joe gives most of the truth but holds something back. John realizes Joe has feelings for Juliana. In San Francisco, Juliana reads a note from the Japanese authority building, hinting at a new film she might need to deliver for the resistance. Frank enters, and they apologize to each other while discussing Laura's death. The next morning, Juliana gets a call from her stepfather Arnold, asking her to help her mother. She tells Frank that Arnold is working with the Japanese, and Frank warns her to be cautious at work. Back in John's office, Joe talks about covering for Juliana when she killed a Nazi agent. John reminds Joe that Juliana is an enemy of the state and offers Joe a chance to redeem himself by using his relationship with Juliana to gather information on the resistance films. John threatens to kill both Joe and Juliana if he fails. Joe reluctantly agrees and calls Juliana, but she can't talk and promises to call back later. Juliana visits her mother, who says she felt Trudy was dead, but now feels better. Juliana, facing away, tears up knowing her sister is actually dead. In New York, Joe visits Rita and her son, asking for their cooperation on one last mission. Later, Juliana sees someone who resembles her sister Trudy, but loses her in the crowd. Tagumi meditates in front of photos of his wife and son, then talks with Inspector Kido about Juliana's employment, revealing Trudy was a known subversive. Tagumi reassures Juliana despite the investigation and reflects on his family before sending her on her duty. He instructs his assistant to find out where Trudy is. At Frank's workplace, police raid the gun factory. Arnold and Juliana meet at a diner, where Arnold explains he took the job with the Japanese to protect his family and believes Trudy is in the neutral zone, which is false. In New York, Joe gets a call from Juliana, who apologizes for not saying goodbye. Joe tries to get information about the new film from her. A man listening in on their call, sent by John, hears that the new film is different. Juliana cuts the conversation short. John reviews the tape of Joe's call and orders him to report daily on his interactions. He sends Joe to find Juliana and her contact. Frank returns to the antique store to negotiate making fake antiques but ends up striking a deal to sell them as genuine. Juliana tells Frank that Arnold is working with the Japanese and that she saw Trudy. Frank doubts this and suggests they flee, but Juliana wants to confirm Trudy's death first. Tagomi confirms Trudy's death and provides Juliana with the burial site location. Juliana finds her sister's body at the site. Joe arrives from the airport and is pushed in line, following a grieving Juliana. Lem Washington, a senior resistance member, teaches a boy to fish while receiving a mission message in San Francisco. Juliana tells Arnold and her mother that Trudy was killed by the Kempeitai. Arnold realizes his information led to Trudy's death. Ed informs Frank that the Kempeitai believed the gun used to shoot the Crown Prince was made at the factory, so Frank and Juliana must leave that night. Ed buys their bus tickets as a final gesture of help. Frank visits the antique store to give Childen his fake piece, but Childen refuses to sell it due to the risk of execution. Frank threatens him, and Childen reluctantly agrees. Juliana meets Karen, a resistance contact, and asks about the film. Karen is suspicious and cannot help. Karen and Lem later discover their contact dead and the film missing. A Yakuza member demands 100,000 yen for the film. At a club, Kido and Yoshida meet with Yakuza member Taishi Okamura, who offers a bribe for the film. Kido refuses, stating his men are incorruptible. Smith learns from the doctor that his son has a severe, incurable disease and will be paralyzed soon. Smith is faced with the decision to euthanize his son. Juliana returns to the flower shop, and Lem and Karen ask her to arrange a meeting with Joe. Juliana brings them to Joe, who agrees to get the 100,000 yen for the Yakuza. In New York, Smith talks with Heydrich, who wants to take Wegener to Germany. Smith and Wegener discuss Wegener's mission, and Wegener is prepared to die for the cause. Childan's fake antique fools his clients, and Frank gets paid. At home, Helen asks John about the hospital visit, and he lies about their son's condition. Joe calls Smith about the Yakuza deal, and Smith agrees to provide the funds if Joe honors their bargain. Juliana quietly tells Frank about the policeman outside and decides not to say goodbye to her mother. At her mother's house, Arnold warns Juliana that the Yakuza are selling the film tonight, and the Kempeitai will be there. Juliana rushes off, promising Frank she'll meet him at the bus. Joe goes to the Yakuza nightclub to get the film, but the place is an ambush. Joe gets a coat with the film, but Kido and Yoshida are waiting outside. Juliana arrives to warn Joe just as Kempeitai arrives. As they escape, they are captured by men with guns, while Kido and the Kempeitai miss them. Juliana and Joe are captured by the Yakuza. Meanwhile, Frank and Ed wait at the bus station for Juliana. Ed insists they get on the bus, but Frank stays behind. At John's home, Thomas falls down the stairs, and his family rushes to help him. John, who is the only one aware of his son's condition, asks his wife to take care of their daughters for school. This incident highlights the urgency for John to make a decision about his son, as the Nazis might discover the truth and take him away. Back with Juliana and Joe, they discuss her plan to escape with Frank, but their conversation is cut short when the Yakuza intervenes and takes Juliana away. She is brought to a location where Lem and Karen, two resistance fighters, negotiate with Taishi Okamura, the Yakuza leader, for her release. They pay 10,000 yen for Juliana's freedom, but Joe's ransom is set at 50,000 yen because of his high-ranking position in the resistance. Okamura also refuses to give them the film, which had previously caused problems for his business. Meanwhile, John is dealing with potential unrest and visits Eric Rader, who once saved his life. He suspects Heydrich might be behind the plot to kill him and hands Rader a note to give to Hitler if anything happens to him. John assures Rader that although he doesn't believe Heydrich will come after him, he has stationed a guard outside Rader's ward as a precaution. In Tagomi's office, Chief Inspector Kido asks for shipping records from Osaka, suspecting that the Yakuza might be smuggling heroin. After Juliana is freed from the Yakuza, Ed snatches her off the street and takes her to his grandfather's apartment, where she meets Frank. Juliana apologizes for missing the bus station, but Frank is upset with her. She explains her whereabouts and asks for Frank's help to free Joe. Initially, Frank refuses to give her the 46,000 yen she needs, questioning why she cares so much about Joe. Juliana insists she loves Frank, but needs to save Joe because he once saved her life. Frank eventually agrees to pay the ransom on the condition that he personally delivers the money. Heydrich, having released Wegener from custody, meets him at a restaurant and reprimands him for treason. season. Heydrich then reveals that Wegener's new mission is to kill Hitler in Berlin, threatening the lives of Wegener's family if he fails. In San Francisco, Frank retrieves his hidden gun and heads to the docks to rescue Joe. He hands over the ransom money and Joe is freed. However, Joe insists on retrieving the film, uses Frank's gun to shoot the Yakuza guards, and takes the film before they escape. Back at Ed's place, Ed's grandfather confronts Juliana, accusing her of endangering his grandson. He threatens to call Kempeitai if she doesn't leave. Meanwhile, Joe and Frank return from the docks, and Juliana and Frank prepare to leave the city. Ed gives them some money and promises to dispose of the gun. At his office, John confronts Captain Connolly, accusing him of betraying him on Heydrich's orders. Connolly admits to following orders, but John pushes him off the skyscraper, making it look like a suicide. Juliana and Frank struggle to board a bus due to identification requirements. A Kempeitai officer orders them to stop, and they split up to meet later at a nearby school. Heydrich and Wegener agree on the plan to assassinate Hitler in Berlin. Heydrich promises to spare Wegener's family if the mission succeeds. Meanwhile, Okamura and Kido discuss the sniper from the Crown Prince's assassination, with Okamura accusing Kido of hiding the truth. Kido offers to reveal the sniper's name for a high price. Juliana and Frank meet at the school and explore the hallways. They watch a film on the school's projector, which shows the aftermath of an atomic bomb in San Francisco. Frank, a prisoner in the film, is executed by Joe, who is the executioner. Juliana and Frank are shocked to realize Joe is a Nazi. Joe arrives, demands the film, and tries to escape. Juliana and Frank reach out to Karen and Lem for help, who proposes a plan. Juliana must retrieve the film and kill Joe to secure a boat to Mexico. Juliana, conflicted due to her past with Joe, refuses but agrees to lure him out of the embassy for Lem to handle. Inspector Kido and Sergeant Yoshida interrogate Ed about the pistol he was trying to destroy, suspecting him of being the Crown Prince's shooter. They question whether Ed, rather than Frank, was the assassin. Meanwhile, Wegener travels to the Austrian Alps for his meeting with Hitler, who is watching a film depicting an alternate World War II. Hitler asks Wegener to join him, but reveals that he knew Wegener was sent by Heydrich. He offers Wegener an honorable death while sparing his family's lives. Heydrich, meanwhile, tries to start a war by asking Smith to join his mission. When the phone rings, Heydrich is shocked to find Hitler on the other end. In the ensuing chaos, Wegener is shot, and Smith and Heydrich scramble for their guns. Smith manages to incapacitate Heydrich, revealing that Wegener chose not to kill Hitler and instead committed suicide. At the docks, Juliana lures Joe into a trap. Joe realizes too late that it's a setup and pleads with Juliana to believe in his changed nature. She helps him onto a boat meant for her and Frank, just before Karen and Lem arrive to kill him. Tagomi reflects on recent events and heads to a public square to meditate. He removes Juliana's heart necklace and, as he meditates, when he opens his eyes, he finds himself in an alternate reality where the United States won World War II. And with this, Season 1 of this series comes to an end. Thanks for watching.